From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1. Everybody must get stoned.
Sales have taken place in our country for decades, and all that money goes into the hands of the underground market and cartels. Well, that stops today.
On January 1st, New Year's Day, Colorado became the first state in the country to legalize the sale of recreational marijuana. Adults over 21 can now purchase pot at 24 stores around the state. Colorado residents can legally possess 1 ounce of the drug, and each adult has the right to grow 6 cannabis plants. Non-residents can possess 1/4 of an ounce, but they can't legally take it across state lines. This decriminalization of marijuana in Colorado is the result of a citizen referendum. And so, on opening day for pot sales, people in Denver waited in line for up to 3 hours. Later this year, another state, Washington, will follow suit with Colorado's pot legalization, but under a more restrictive regimen. Retail sales of the drug will be permitted, but subject to a statewide annual production limit of 40 metric tons of marijuana. But unlike in Colorado, Washington does not trust its citizens to grow their own pot. Nationwide, supporters of legalization say pot sales will have positive effects like 1, take money out of the hands of criminal organizations, 2, create jobs, 3, boost state revenues.
Here's a receipt.
Colorado officials currently estimate sales may hit $400 million, generating $67 million in tax revenue. On the other hand, critics of pot legalization point out that federal law, U.S. law, still bans the cultivation and sale and possession of marijuana.
On the federal level, the Obama administration's official position vis-a-vis quote-unquote renegade states is non-interference. Question, is the era of pot prohibition coming to an end? Or are Colorado and Washington on a collision course with the federal government? Pat Buchanan.
I think it is, to a degree, coming to an end, which means there are going to be more potheads and more high school dropouts and more automobile accidents involving marijuana, John. But there's no doubt there's a real trend in this country, a deeply libertarian trend. On the left, it favors same-sex marriage and gambling, even prostitution, legalization of all of these things, which used to be considered vices. And because of the revenue involved and because of the beliefs of individuals should have autonomy. And on the right, there's a libertarianism as well, where everybody's got to have his AR-15 rifle and its 30-round clip. But this is the sentiment in the country, I think, sort of the decline of community and the rise of the idea of the autonomous and privileged self. And this is a trend, and it's going to continue.
Eleanor?
Well, I think this is states' rights, the voice of the people, which is something that conservatives generally support. And I think you can list a lot of positive things that are going to come out of the legalization of a substance that's already being used, and a substance that's far less harmful in terms of driving and everyday behavior than alcohol, and less harmful than tobacco, which over a long term creates a huge public health issue because of lung cancer and such. I think it was pretty dramatic when the Obama administration, when Eric Holder, the Attorney General, actually called the governors of Colorado and Washington State and said the federal government would not interfere. But the federal government has issued a bunch of guidelines for U.S. attorneys around the country if drug lords start using legal marijuana as a cover for other business, and there are other examples where you would get federal interference. But this is like gay marriage. This is a sentiment that is arising from the states. It is bubbling up. It is coming to Washington. Washington is playing catch up, and I do think that the war on marijuana is over.
Can you move that non-interference of Washington and telling Colorado that, where that could lead, that would be antagonistic to sound public policy?
No, it could lead to wider legalization, but John, this issue has moved extremely slowly and incrementally. Okay, you open with Bob Dylan singing "Everybody Must Get Stoned." That song's not actually about getting high on marijuana. But that aside, that was sung and popular 40, 50 years ago. And here we are now with one state that's legalizing marijuana and another that is about to, okay? And then we have medical marijuana, which is kind of a legal limbo. There's a possibility in the coming 3 years that this will expand because the Obama administration is no longer going to be facing re-election, and this is a less political issue. If you'll recall, in his first term, the opposite occurred. The Obama administration's Justice Department called up Rhode Island, New England states that were talking about legalizing medical marijuana and did the exact opposite. They said, if you do it, we're going to crack down and start closing places. And in Rhode Island, the governor pulled back. So what the federal government says does have an impact, and there's a possibility that if the administration has swung the other way now, that over the next 2-3 years, we're going to see this change a little bit.
It undermines compliance with federal law. True or false?
It does, and the fact right now is that you have dispensaries in California, medical marijuana dispensaries, where the people who run them can't have bank accounts because they run afoul of federal money laundering laws. So they're gathering cash and becoming prey to thugs who know that they've got cash on them. So this is going to have to be dealt with by the federal government at one point or another. And my hope, and we're going to be writing about this in the Washington Monthly, is that we're going to have federal legislation that makes sure that this is done in a way that has that minimizes the bad health outcomes, the public health outcomes.
Yeah. Paul, dream on. Okay, Uruguay leads. We're talking about a country now, Uruguay in South America. Listen to this.
In December, the South American nation of Uruguay became the first country in the world to legalize marijuana. Uruguay's Senate voted to create a system to license private companies to grow marijuana, with sales and distribution controlled by the state. Individuals may cultivate, possess, and use limited quantities of the drug. Uruguay's president, Jose Mujica, promoted legalization as the best way to curb the violence that has plagued Latin America in the decades-long war on drugs and to reduce the power and profits of criminal cartels. Other Latin American countries may soon follow suit, notably Belize, Chile, Colombia, Guatemala, and Mexico.
Question, if marijuana is legalized widely, where does that leave the notorious drug cartels? I ask you, Guy.
I think it presents challenges for drug cartels that make money trafficking marijuana into the United States. But I don't necessarily think that it affects the landscape of illegal drug crime. I mean, look, this is marijuana. We're not talking about the biggest, most profitable thing for the cartels, which is cocaine, heroin, far harder drugs that aren't about to be legalized anytime soon. A point on Uruguay as well, having been around Montevideo and down there covering the story in the last decade, look, the Uruguayans have led this narrative in Latin America that U.S. policies in the war on drugs and Plan Colombia had created what they call el efecto globo, the balloon effect. And all it did was control Colombian cartels, but the problem of drug violence spread south. So their policies in Uruguay are a backlash.
Uruguay had one of the lowest crime rates in Latin America. And in recent years, those rates have been going up. And they attribute it to the drug trade. And so they basically are sidelining the business about marijuana, which was huge, because they want to get rid of the drug lords without going after them with guns. And their law has only been in effect for barely a month, so we don't know how that experiment is going. Yeah, we don't know how the experiment is going to play out. But conversations are starting everywhere about legalization, and that's positive.
Marijuana is a gateway drug, and you got these powerful cartels. You got marijuana legalized in one state. The cartels just say, look, let's pour our marijuana into the United States, undercut these guys. We got a certain measure of legalization. I think it's going to be a real incentive for the cartels to get in the business of moving marijuana and their other drugs here. The point is, what I think is going to happen is, I do agree it's best that this be done state by state, so that you can have a national backlash if it doesn't work out.
You don't think American drug producers can beat the Latin American drug producers? Come on, you're not a patriot.
NAFTA is responsible for this.
No, Pat has stumbled into an interesting point, and it reminds me of young Kennedy, who is of the opinion that marijuana is an escalated drug. It's just opening the door to
Sure.
all types
It's
of
like beer before booze,
cocaine,
John.
heroin, meth, ecstasy, spice, designer drugs synthesized from chemical
John,
compounds
you
and
and
so
I
forth.
started drinking beer, didn't we, when we were 15 or 16?
And look at us today.
In 17, you're drinking the hard whiskey. It's an entry drug. It's a gateway drug.
Yeah, but it's
Okay,
out there.
okay.
It's
Now,
out
now
there.
where do we? What are the cartels going to have left? The cartels are going to have what?
Cocaine?
Cocaine, heroin,
methamphetamine.
meth, ecstasy, spice, and similar drugs.
I have to.
Yeah, but
Unless Kennedy is right,
Yeah,
and that's
but-
going to be eaten away
but-
too.
but
well,
you're-
what is mankind going to become?
No, you're draining some of the profits from a part of their business, and you're regulating something that's already being used. And states that are starved for cash are going to jump on
That's
this.
that's
This
the
is-
escalator
it's
drug,
like
right?
a lot
The
of
states
it.
are going to want to have all this money, and that's why
All
we're
right,
going to
let's
get
get out.
national
One
drug
thing, not to mention
legislation.
the fact that in areas of the United States where prescription drugs that have opioids in them are more available than marijuana, high school kids are far more likely to try opioids than they are to smoke marijuana.
So after the pharmacist-
absolutely. So this idea that it's this gateway drug, the possibility is that
I
if you
think the
make
kids are gonna
marijuana,
say-
if you make marijuana more
Kennedy. I
available,
think Kennedy
then
is
kids are
right.
more likely to
Kennedy
try
is right,
that.
and he had the
I don't think the
experience to know
kids
it,
are going to
he's
say,
right.
get me an opioid. I think, do you have some pot is more likely to be the question.
If they want it,
And that
they'll
might
get
be a
it.
good thing.
Give me the year where all.
Would you rather have your kids addicted to opioids or smoking a little bit of marijuana when they grow up?
Will
I do the beer and then the Jack Daniels later, all right?
will all 50 states pay
Pat, the
attention, Pat?
50s
Will
are
all
over.
50 states
No, all 50 states aren't going to
legalize recreational marijuana? And if so, how
first-
many years will it take?
First, the
How
Republican.
many years will it take?
It's not going to be all 50 states. It's going to be like same-sex
You agree with
marriage.
that?
Right.
How many years? How many
in
years?
Utah, where Mormonism is prevalent, they don't even allow caffeine, or they don't
can't-
permit
We're
caffeine in
talking
their
only
religion.
about recreational marijuana. How
Oh,
many states?
recreational, how many states?
Well, not how many. How long will it take
How-
for all the states?
I think a decade or so.
What do you think?
10 states in the next 5 years, it'll take more than 100 years for everybody
Or
else.
every state?
Exactly.
You think?
I think you have the majority of states in 10 years.
I think, what is that?
Well,
25. it would be,
26.
John. 26.
At least 26.
I'll get news for you. My information is by the year 2025, recreational marijuana will be legal in all 50 states. Issue 2, whistleblower or felon.
The editorial board of the New York Times has decisively weighed in on the case of Edward Snowden, the former NSA, that's National Security Agency, contractor who 7 months ago leaked reams of information about NSA surveillance programs to the press and by proxy to the world. Mr. Snowden fled the U.S., first to Hong Kong, then to Moscow, where he has temporary asylum. The U.S. government has charged Mr. Snowden with espionage and theft.
What this means.
This past Thursday, the New York Times described Mr. Snowden as a whistleblower, not a criminal. Quote, considering the enormous value of the information he has revealed and the abuses he has exposed, Mr. Snowden deserves better than a life of permanent exile, fear, and flight. He may have committed a crime to do so, but he has done his country a great service. It is time for the United States to offer Mr. Snowden a plea bargain or some form of clemency that would allow him to return home, face at least substantially reduced punishment in light of his role as a whistleblower, and have the hope of a life advocating for greater privacy and far stronger oversight of the runaway intelligence community. Unquote. In the editorial, the New York Times takes the NSA to task with details of its abuses and shaky legal reasoning, and concludes, quote, when someone reveals that government officials have routinely and deliberately broken the law, that person should not face life in prison at the hands of the same government. That's why Rick Leggett, who leads the NSA's task force on the Snowden leaks, recently told CBS News that he would consider amnesty if Mr. Snowden would stop any additional leaks.
It's worth having a conversation about. I would need assurances that the remainder of the data could be secured, and my bar for those assurances would be very high.
The Times continues, quote, and it's why President Obama should tell his aides to begin finding a way to end Mr. Snowden's vilification and give him an incentive to return home, unquote.
Question, will President Obama relent and offer Mr. Snowden some form of clemency, Elder Cliff.
He might. The NSA official that you just showed on the screen told 60 Minutes that he would consider a plea bargain or clemency in exchange for assurances that the data that's been captured by Snowden is now secure. What's fascinating is the government really has no idea of exactly what he has, and they're worried what else might be out there. And I think if you look at most people, they regard Snowden, maybe not a heroic whistleblower, but not a traitor who should spend the rest of his life in jail.
John,
so I think there's plenty room there for negotiation, and there's 3 more years before the president leaves office.
The guy broke the law, he broke faith with the American people and with the nation. He committed the crime and he ought to do the time. And let me say this, if the president gave clemency or a pardon to Snowden right now, you'd have resignations, I believe, all through the National Security Agency.
Nobody's
and some of these other
talking
people
about
hold it through that. And I think you'd have a firestorm in this country and among some grassroots Democrats as well, and you would put at real risk the Democratic candidate in 2016 if Hillary Clinton approved of any kind of pardon for Snowden right now.
Nobody's
This
talking
is a
about a
very
pardon.
volatile issue right now, more so than Eleanor realizes.
Repeat what you said about Hillary.
I said if Hillary approved of Obama's pardon of Snowden, she would have real problems in 2016 because grassroots Democrats, many of whom might lean to her, would be deeply offended. They're very patriotic folks.
Yeah, I think it's a very hot issue, but I think it's on the other side. I think you see more people advocating on behalf of what he said and angry at the government
They're the
as
ones who
opposed
want to
to the other
legalize
way around.
marijuana,
But
too.
no, again, you kept using the word pardon. Nobody's talking about a pardon. They're talking about a plea bargain, which is routine in criminal cases. And, you know, he could serve a length of time. It doesn't have to be 50 years or his life. It could be, you know, 10.
Edward Snowden made these massive revelations, and it's almost a sea shift in the U.S. intelligence community. But he is just the latest now who is leaking this information, and we can debate whether he's a traitor or a whistleblower. This issue transcends ideological positions because it's new, and it involves the evolution of communications and the evolution of concepts of secrecy. Okay, Edward Snowden falls into the camp of Julian Assange, and there will be another Edward Snowden within the coming 2 years, and this whole discussion about whether or not we trust, as Americans, our government
will be more,
to
will there
partake
not?
in spying activities
but
of this scale.
Will there
is
not?
the bigger question.
The self-interest of the U.S. government is to get under control what he has.
I
And if
completely
that
agree.
involves
I totally agree.
negotiations and a plea bargain, I don't think that's such a bad deal. You know, all of
know,
the
that
politics
clemency
aside,
for Snowden-
what I'm saying is it may
Clemency
be
for
it may be
self-interest
a
of the
moot
country should
point.
be
But clemency
I-
for
I-
Snowden, and
priority.
you will get more Snowdens.
Is it in President Obama's character to reverse course under pressure?
you know, reverse course. I don't know that he has said absolutely. He hasn't closed the door. You know, I think he has said that Snowden broke the law and should come back and face charges. He can come back
more
and
do you
face
want?
charges,
He
and
said he
then
broke
you
the
can
law.
have, and then you can have again. Plea bargains go on every day in courtrooms.
It is
So-
absolutely in President Obama's political nature to change course, as it is with most politicians, and this is a big problem with our government right now, as it was with the Bush administration before. Obama already changed course. He came out in California when this story was first blowing up and basically said, we're not doing this. As far as I know, no, it wasn't of
John,
that scale.
Obama-
Then the leaks come out and all of a sudden
Who
he's
has-
going to put a panel
who has-
together to
who has-
investigate how deep it
right.
was.
Who
So
has
yes,
stuck
he will
his or
change
her
course.
neck out in defending the behavior of the NSA and trying to get control of the situation?
Well, you defended this.
Dianne Feinstein.
Okay, right, exactly. But you know something here? The New York Times, John, there is an inherent conflict of interest between journalists and so-called whistleblowers or guys who put out secrets. Take Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers. He could have gone to jail for 35 years, and the New York Times gets a Pulitzer Prize for printing this stuff. There's a real conflict of interest in terms of what is best for the country.
Well, I think what Daniel Ellsberg did was best for the country. And as I recall,
I know.
that all came out right around the time that Watergate was emerging, maybe.
It was a year before Watergate.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah, but
1971.
the legal case
the
fell
problem with Edward
apart in the
Snowden
context of
is a
Watergate.
kind of a mixed bag here. It's undoubtedly some of his leaks about the metadata and the internal internal surveillance caught the government red-handed in its inability to oversee what the NSC was doing, and a lot of good will come of that. On the other hand, these revelations about some of the NSC foreign spying, like spying on foreign governments, which are perfectly constitutional, did significant diplomatic damage to the State Department, to the president standing. None of that was necessarily patriotic or helpful, and I think it really hurts his case for some kind of clemency or plea bargain.
Yeah,
I think he's
what do the polls show? Do the polls show a percentage of the public that still thinks Snowden betrayed the country?
No, majority think he's a whistleblower,
No,
I
that's not true.
I
Half the
don't think
public
so.
still think he betrayed the country.
Well, half and half. Okay.
Now, is this something that Obama is going to turn around by a pardon?
I honestly can't
No-
imagine him
no pardon.
clement,
Nobody's talking
having
about
kind
a
of clemency.
I
I
cannot
don't think there'll
imagine
be a
him
plea
doing
bargain.
that.
I
I
think
can't imagine him doing that.
this is
either.
a guy who's gone after a lot of whistleblowers.
But I can't
He's not
imagine-
He's not
Why
gonna roll.
would he
I
do
can't
it, John?
You know,
imagine
he hasn't
Snowden
let Jonathan
serving 10
Pollard
years
out of
instead
prison. He's not
50.
gonna. He's not gonna.
Why would he
relent on
do
this.
it, John? What is in it for Obama
Yeah, I don't
to
see
give
it.
clemency or a pardon
To
to Snowden?
No
Merits.
pardon to secure
Merits.
the
Merits. The
secure
arguments
the
have been
data that he
presented
stole.
very, very cogently and persuasively
Well,
in
what
that
is-
long
The
editorial from
president's
the
going
New
to
York
ask,
Times.
what is in it
Yes,
for me
to
if I do
secure-
this?
to
It's
secure
the right
the
thing to
data.
do. The
To sec-
Times makes it the
Right.
right thing to do.
No, to secure the data.
You understand? Can you appreciate that?
To secure the data that he has,
not-
and that the government does not know how much more he has. That's what's
That's-
in it for that. I mean, that's why you would want to make some sort of a plea bargain with him to get him back to this country.
And to
So
take
you can
control- and
secure
you think-
that
and
data.
you think-
And the NSA official has said that. That's not, I didn't invent that.
Yes, I know. The NSA
It
person said that on
makes a lot of
television this
sense
week.
to me.
And he would consider pardon.
Not pardon. Everybody keeps using pardon. Nobody's going to pardon him. He's going to serve
forget
time.
pardon,
He's
but
going to serve time.
non-prosecution.
If he comes back, he's going to serve time.
Well, we're
the
talking about
question is
non-prosecution.
somebody 30 years old going to serve 10 years, 20 years, 50 years? You know, there's a lot of leeway there.
Final question. Will Obama cut any slack for Snowden as you see this developing? Yes or no?
No.
No.
Possibly.
Possibly.
Maybe.
Maybe. What is this? Evasion
I think
Central?
we don't know. That's why because
I
think
don't see it.
Issue 3. War against the Olympics.
2 bombings rocked the Russian city of Volgograd this week, killing more than 30 people and wounding dozens. Suicide bombers targeted Russian commuters, attacking a busy train station and a bus. While no group has claimed responsibility, Russian authorities suspect a man called Doku Umarov, the self-styled emir of the Caucasus. Last July, in a 4-minute video published by the radical website Kavkaz Center, Umarov told his fighters that attacking civilians was justified in preventing the Winter Olympic Games. Quote, "They, Russia, plan to hold the Olympics on the bones of our ancestors, on the bones of many, many dead Muslims buried on the territory of our land on the Black Sea, and we as Mujahideen are obliged not to permit that, using any methods allowed us by the Almighty Allah," unquote. Umarov claims that the Olympic host city of Sochi is part of his Caucasus Emirate. He denounced the games as a, quote, satanic dance on the bones of our ancestors, unquote. With the Olympic opening ceremony scheduled in little more than a month, the bombings look as if Umarov is making good on his threat. The Obama administration officially designated the Caucasus Emirate a terrorist organization in 2011 and put a $5 million bounty on Umarov's capture. In the wake of this week's Volgograd attacks, President Obama was quick to offer intelligence assistance to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Question. Will Putin accept Obama's offer? And if so, will cooperation on Olympic security reverse the downward spiral in U.S.-Russian relations? Guy Taylor.
I think privately, John, that the Putin and the government in Moscow already has accepted Obama's offer, and there's quite a bit of secretive back-channel communication on terrorism between Moscow and Washington. publicly, it's anybody's guess here. It's not politically viable for Vladimir Putin, who's gained a lot of political traction out of trashing the Obama administration and trying to run a kind of propaganda war where he makes Obama look bad. It's also not politically viable for Obama to now reach out during this period and be friends with Vladimir Putin. But I do think that behind the scenes, both nations see a player like Doku Umarov as a very charismatic regional leader of an Al-Qaeda style movement, even though it's rooted in Chechnya. Let me remind you how many of us had heard of Chechnya outside of the news media or the intelligence community prior to April of last year when the Boston Marathon bombings occurred. It involved 2 young Chechen immigrants who are believed by our intelligence community to have drawn inspiration from Doku Umarov. So there's this guy's a player, and Moscow and Washington are communicating behind the scenes.
Here, John, to be worried about.
Yeah,
I think we need to watch it, because I would imagine if he's set out an Ayman al-Zawahiri style video message 6 months ago that is being picked up on by cells inside Russia that are either, whether they're directly in communication with him right now or not, there are probably more plots on the horizon between now and the start of the Olympics.
Let me get into this.
The U.S. has the means to identify a lot of people all over the world. We can do that, a lot of that. Satellites are a huge help.
But John,
people don't realize the extent to which they are so good. You understand?
So you're suggesting that we already know where this guy's hiding?
No, I'm suggesting that we should offer to help.
Well, John,
we don't want those games to go sour.
No,
because
Guy
of
is right.
anything like this.
John, let me talk.
We already have them.
What Obama should do with this threat to us and with this second act of terrorism, he should say, I've changed my mind and I'm going to go to Sochi, to the games, in solidarity with the Russian people who are under the gun for this terrorism, because we're all in this together. It would be a big, magnanimous gesture. Putin would have no alternative but to welcome him, and I think it would break the boycott. It would be a big gesture, and we got to get on with the Russians.
Would Putin welcome that, or would he be afraid of that?
It would make it a huge success out of his Sochi games, which is what he wants.
All the time. Bye-bye.